Welcome in to the All Things Bama podcast, powered by BamaCentral.com, your Sports Illustrated home for all Alabama Crimson Tide news and information. I'm your host, Tyler Martin. Joined with me is Tony Tsoukalas and Blake Byler of BamaCentral.com. Guys, thanks again for coming on here. Also, shout out to our YouTube viewers. It's kind of cool seeing that on YouTube each and every single week. It's kind of a new dynamic we've been playing around with. I'm glad to be on that platform as well. Feel free to comment in the comment sections, like us, subscribe to us on all major platforms that we have. But yeah, here to talk about Alabama's disappointing into its home season against Texas A&M, spring football on the horizon, the NFL Combine. So guys, let's get into it, man. Let's go ahead and start with, we'll save basketball for a little later. Let's go ahead and start with football. And I want to start with really, Matt Rhea leaving. That's the biggest news coming out of Tuscaloosa, taking a job with the Saints. David Ballou is staying, but his compadre, his sidekick, Dr. Matt Rhea has left Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that those two are splitting up after, you would have thought if you would have lost one, you would have lost the other, right? But the fact that they're splitting up is kind of odd. Look, I'm not going to pretend like Matt Rhea is not a big loss for Alabama because I really thought, what he was doing was special. But I do think that the most important thing is that he implemented this system already. And so Alabama knows how to work in his system. I don't think they're going to depart from the system. So I'm not sure they're losing much in that. It's almost like, if you teach a man to fish kind of thing, you know what I'm saying? And he taught Alabama how to fish. So I think Alabama is going to continue on the same road. Although, I mean, obviously you'd like to have Matt Rhea there. But I don't think all is lost for Alabama in terms of the progress they're making in the sports science department.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And it's important not to necessarily overreact to the loss of maybe a strength coach or a coach of that nature. Because I remember a lot of people would take to Twitter after Scott Cochran left for Georgia, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is the end for Alabama," blah blah blah, just because such a big piece and a good assistant coach like that was moving on. But ultimately, like you said, Tony, the system's staying in place, and so things will be different, but maybe not as much of a difference as people might expect.
Yeah, and when Matt Rhea, on social media, he announced that Paul Constantine is taking over, I guess, or filling in for his role, and that he's been, working with him for 4 years and kind of studying under him. So I mean, goes back to what we're saying, Constantine's gonna know the system. He's going to know what Matt Rhea taught him, and he's going to know how to work this stuff and kind of continue on. So I think, they'll be in good hands. And David Ballou is a good strength coach too. So, and he's also knows the system, although he's not the computer guy. Having him there, I think is going to be big as well.
But one aspect of this that's really interesting to me is the recruiting side of this, right? Like those two guys were pivotal, especially when they got hired in the recruiting realm, right? I remember, think back, it was winter of 2020, it was January 2020. They're coming into Tuscaloosa right before the pandemic happens. Alabama's getting a facelift to its sports science facilities, upgrading, being real great at innovating, right, in this realm. And when I talked to recruits, some of the last ones who were able to be on campus before the pandemic, all of them were like, we love these two guys. These two guys, what they're doing with how they lift weights. It's not about, how much you're lifting, but it's about the technique. It's about the finesse. It's about all these little things, the science behind it. That was really big for recruits. And I don't think that's going to change at all, right? I think there is a system in place, like you guys are saying, but I would be curious to see just kind of what kind of pull Matt Rhea had with players, because, he'd be working out with guys one-on-one, like, Evan Neal, those videos went viral from Dr. Rhea, the last 2 off seasons. And so the kind of connection that he had with those guys and the kind of pull that he had, just being the brains behind what Alabama is doing. Because if you look at the muscle injuries that they've had, the soft tissue injuries, how they went drastically down when those two guys got to Tuscaloosa, I would just be kind of curious that angle with it. But yeah, I mean, David Ballou is a phenomenal strength coach, and you're right, Blake. Everybody thought the sky was falling when Cochran left.
Yeah, and I know the recruits like Matt Rhea, and I'm not trying to take that away. He's done well, and he's got a good bond with his players, but they also like the shiny new gadgets, and all those shiny new gadgets are still going to be there. So unless the person filling in just totally messes up as a salesman of these, it's kind of like selling a Ferrari. I feel like we all can sell a Ferrari, people that want to buy a Ferrari, are going to be, it sells itself. So I think Alabama's strength in sports science, department is going to sell itself.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Let's kind of switch over to the NFL Combine. Man, it's got here quick. It's, most things are really back to normal now. There's the Combine up in Indianapolis. Brian Robinson took center stage on Thursday, talking to the media. Slade Bolden, wide receivers, did some of the drills. John Metchi was there speaking with the media as well. And then we heard from Jameson, kind of heard from about his recovery and how things are going for him. My first question to you guys is, and I saw Slade, he ran a 4.63 on his first. That was the unofficial time for the 40. Let's start with Slade Bolden real quick. What do you guys think his professional prospects are? And maybe what day, day 2 at best, day 3, what are y'all kind of seeing for him?
I mean, whoa, like I don't see Slade Bolden getting drafted. Like, I think he's going to get he's going to get a chance to be an undrafted free agent somewhere, which will probably be better for him than getting drafted in the 6th or 7th round. But I don't think he's going to get drafted, in my opinion. I don't think, what's to say if he, finds a place that he's comfortable? I mean, it's really obvious to say the New England Patriots, but what if he signs with the New England Patriots as an undrafted free agent, develops or continues his relationship with Mac Jones, maybe helps out as a special teams guy early on in his career, because that's something he can do. So he's got those tools to help out in a variety of ways. And we've seen guys, I mean, look at Garrett Dieter, wasn't picked. Still, he's stuck around the league. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, like, I think that, Slade Bolden's kind of in that category. I don't think he's going to be picked. If he is going to be picked, it's going to be later in the draft, but I don't think that means that he's not going to have an NFL career.
Yeah, like he's not going to go. I don't think he's going to go day 2. Like, if he goes day 3, it's going to be 6th or 7th. Like, he's going to be, I like that you brought up like the undrafted free agent thing, because he's going to be like a culture kind of guy. Like, he comes in and he's going to be like good for the locker room. He'll play special teams. He's not going to immediately make some big impact, but like, who's to say he can't carve out a role? Like, I know obviously he was a different kind of player and a better player in college, but like, I didn't see Hunter Renfrow being as successful as he is like with the Raiders or someone like that. He could find a role maybe as a slot receiver, backup, like guy that gets a couple snaps here and there. And like you brought up Garrett Dieter, like it's a great example of a guy who he was undrafted, wasn't he?
I have to look. Tyler, you gave me a weird look when I said Garrett Dieter. Is that not a good one for you?
The reason I'm saying that is, okay, so Garrett Dieter, right? He had one season at Alabama, coming over from Bowling Green. Like, he's now a practice squad player with the Chiefs, right? He's been there for a couple of years. He's carved out a role, right? Like that's what his career.
He was undrafted.
Yeah, he was undrafted.
Yeah,
like I feel like that's what Slade's gonna have to do. Is he's gonna have to carve out his own role. Like, I don't think he's gonna be drafted and handed a role.
Yeah, sorry, we cut you off here. Tyler, finish up.
Because Slade Bolden, to me, what he contributed to the Alabama program was far more than Garrett Dieter, just in my opinion, right? Like, I mean, he was a part of a national championship winning team, scored a touchdown in that game, right? He had some flash plays, especially when Jalen Waddle went down in 2020, had some great moments in 2021. So, there was obviously some issues with protection of the ball. But, as a pros prospect, I like Slade Bolden's chances more than his per se. But yeah, I kind of see him as a late day 3 undrafted free agent, because to me, the teams that are going to go after him, there's going to have to be some familiarity, right? Like, I think the Dolphins with Tua, or maybe even the Eagles with Jalen Hurts, or Mac Jones with the Patriots. I think there's one of those teams with an Alabama quarterback. I think there's going to be that connection there that he's going to be able to find a role, because to me, Slade Bolden, he's got the culture aspect. You're right about that, Blake. He works hard. He keeps his head down. He grinds, right? Like, he's similar to Mac Jones in that sense of just knowing the game of football. And that will take him further than maybe his God-given ability and talent will. So yeah, we're all kind of seeing the same things there. Brian Robinson, let's stay on the receivers. John Metchi, Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams still projected a first-round pick despite the ACL tear. This is a loaded draft class for receivers. A couple years ago, there was a loaded one too. It was like Justin Jefferson. You had Rager. You had a bunch of other guys, 5 going in the first round a couple years ago. And this could be something similar this year. Jameson Williams, to me, if he keeps that speed, which they're expecting that not to be a drop off whenever he gets fully healthy, I think he's going to be maybe the steal of the first round.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame that he's not going to get to run this week, because I think that would have given him the momentum. You're right. There's a ton of wide receivers. And the only thing I'm worried about with Jameson Williams is not that he's going to lose his speed. It's he's going to get maybe passed up by people who did get to run. And people almost forget. I think he's put enough on tape though, that it's not like people are going to forget about him. Talent evaluators love the speed. As long as they feel like he's going to have that, I think, I kind of compare him to Henry Ruggs, and, we saw Henry Ruggs starting to get better. I'm not sure he's like at the Jalen Waddle level, but I think he's a Henry Ruggs guy that might take a little bit longer in the NFL to get going, but he's still going to get going. I think he should be a first round pick. If he slips out of the first round, or even as the late 20s, where you kind of see him sometimes fall, you're right, he's going to be an absolute steal, because that speed is just a game changer. And we saw it against your really good secondaries this year. He was still able to get free and exploit that. And so I think it's going to make some team in the back end of the first round pretty happy.
Yeah, I think so too. Like the back end of the first round, there are a lot of teams that kind of need an extra vertical threat. And so like we talked about the Patriots earlier, but like that's a team that had almost no weapons on the perimeter. Like who was their leading receiver? Was it
they signed Nelson Aguilar to do that, and he just didn't. They don't have a speed guy. Yeah, you look at there's other teams, but the Patriots as well. Yeah, that's a team that super needs what Jameson Williams has to offer.
Like that's a great fit. Or someone like the Packers, who you have Devontae Adams, but who do you have besides that? That's another guy that can stretch the field for them. And so there are tons of teams like in that back, like in the 20s, maybe like at 31, 32, like teams that need that extra vertical threat at receiver. And so I can definitely see him balling right there.
And if I'm Jameson Williams, guys, one of the teams you just named, Blake, the Packers, if they keep Aaron Rodgers, like if I'm Jameson Williams, I hope that happens. Like I hope I go to the Chiefs to play with Patrick Mahomes. I hope I go play with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. I hope I end up in an organization like Tampa, who could potentially get like a Russell Wilson, or maybe even Deshaun Watson if his situation gets clear, right? So maybe it is better that he falls later on to those in those later rounds. The wide receivers in this draft class is definitely something I'm watching, along with the quarterbacks too. I know there's not much Alabama flair there until next year, when Bryce goes into that 2023 draft class. But I'm interested to see kind of where like Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, those guys fall. Let's talk about Brian Robinson here. Brian Robinson might not be one of the top Nick Saban running backs of the Nick Saban era at Alabama. But he's a guy who I think could really carve out a career for a good while here in the NFL, right? Like we've seen guys, Eddie Lacy, right, fizzle out, Richardson fizzle out, TJ Yeldon for the most part fizzle out. He kind of jumped from team to team, but I think Brian Robinson can really be that guy for whether it's like a secondary. I can never really see him being that workhorse in the NFL, but I can see him being a second tier, third down type of guy that teams would just love to have to fill a roster spot.
He's a good power back. He's got nice size nice athleticism for his size. And, he mentioned it today, and I wrote something about this. He does a lot of the little things well. He's a good blocker. He's a good pass protector. And I think that, and he's an experienced guy that's been in a system with a lot of, talented running backs. So he's going to know how to do that in the NFL. So you're getting a mature guy with with still a lot of tread on the tires. And a guy that has, like you said, a skill set, like he can be a tough third down running back in tough yards, maybe a goal line guy. He can also catch out of the backfield. I don't know if that's going to be how well that will translate, just because I don't think he has the speed and the elusiveness that other, NFL backs have. He doesn't have that Najee Harris had. But, he's not going to lose yards. And I think in the NFL, that's vital. You know, you can't have people dancing around and losing yards. He's a guy that he's going to get you 2 to 3 yards every single play. And then maybe he busts some big ones too. And I think NFL teams like that. You know, it's not necessarily sexy, but knowing that you're going to have a guy that's going to consistently get positive yards is a huge deal in the NFL.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest positives about him is you know exactly what you're going to get with him. And like, I kind of think about, I could maybe see his like being drafted in his career, the first couple of years playing out, maybe sort of like Damian Harris's did. He was like, he was a 3rd round guy and ended up in a committee, but his reliability is what got him on the field. And now he's pretty much the lead guy, like in New England. And so, like Brian, he, like you said, he does all the little things right. Like he's a good blocker. He has reliable hands out of the backfield. And so just the fact that teams know what they're going to get, like he has a higher like floor, if you know what I'm saying. Like he's not flashy like a Breece Hall or like a Isaiah Spiller or Kenneth Walker. Like he's not going to be one of the first couple backs off the board, but once he does get taken, he'll be able to like carve out a role just with his reliability, I feel like.
Yeah, I talked with Oliver Hodgkinson of Pro Football Network, and he has, or they have Brian Robinson as number 8 overall among the running backs in this class. And that seems about fair, you know? That's probably somewhere, depending on how things go, you know, I think he sees him early day 3. Maybe if, you know, I think if Brian Robinson was to run a respectable like a nice 40 time, I think you could see him maybe sneak into the day 2. I don't think he's going to sneak into day 2. I think he's going to be a day 3 pick, but he'll probably be more, you know, he'll definitely, I think, be more 4th, 5th round than he will be, you know, 5th, 6th.
Yeah. And another offensive player I want to get to, something that Nick Saban, you know, there's not many things he hasn't done at Alabama, but there is one thing, and that's have the first player drafted overall in the NFL draft. And there's a shot, guys. Evan Neal. You know, I see a lot of mock drafts. You know, there's the offensive lineman from NC State who has been talked about, and there's a lot of buzz with him for the Jaguars. Is Evan Neal going to be that pick, though, for Jacksonville?
I would pick him first. Like, you know, Ekonwu, there's always going to be the hype around the guy that people are high on. I think that's going to level out. I think Evan Neal is going to get that hype back during Alabama's pro day when he, you know, just does Evan Neal stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like if it's a testing thing, Evan Neal's going to knock it out of the park, assuming he's healthy, which I think he probably took this time to make sure that he can put on a dazzling display, because he has the ability to just blow people out of the water in terms of his athletic ability for that size. The thing that he has going for him to be the number 1 overall pick is there's not a quarterback worth trading up for that pick. So a lot of times you think, oh, this guy's warrants the number 1 overall pick, but you know, he's not a quarterback. And so somebody's going to trade up. There just isn't that. So I think Jacksonville probably keeps the pick. I think it probably depends on how much they value the edge rushers. You know, if they want an edge rusher, or if somebody else really values an edge rusher, maybe they trade down. But assuming Jacksonville keeps the pick, I think they pick Evan Neal. It makes too much sense for me.
They got to protect Trevor.
Yeah, for sure. And like you talked about guys that maybe warrant the number 1 overall pick, but like don't get picked because of a quarterback. Like I think of like Chase Young a couple of years ago, like an insane talent that goes number 2 because the Bengals need a quarterback and they got Joe Burrow. But like the fact that there's no one's trading up to take Matt Corral or Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis number 1, none of them just really jump off the page as that kind of guy. So then you got to look at like the edge rushers. Like, do they want Kayvon Thibodeau? Do they want Aiden Hutchinson? But then like you said, Tyler, like they've got to protect Trevor. And one thing you don't want, and like this, a lot of people criticized like the Bengals a year ago for taking Chase as early as they did when like Penei Sewell was on the board, because everyone was like, you've got to protect Burrow because you just saw Burrow get hurt. And so I'm sure the Jags still believe in Trevor and they still think he's their guy. And so if he's your guy, I think you got to protect him. And
there's not a pick that they can make that will help Trevor Lawrence out more than Neal.
No,
so they can get an edge rusher and that might help the team out, but there's not even a wide receiver that warrants. There's not a Jamar Chase that they can pick. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like they can't even trade back in the top 10 and get that guy, I don't think. You know, so I think it just makes too much sense. It's
Yeah,
really edge for Jacksonville. It's edge rusher or offensive lineman.
And I think offensive line just makes too much sense because like you don't want to take an edge rusher and then Trevor Lawrence tears the ACL because you can't protect him next year. And you're like, oh, well, wish we took an offensive lineman first. Like, I feel like you got to protect him and then build the defense. Make sure that he stays healthy while you're building the team.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And for me, like, Jacksonville, Doug Peterson, a guy who's a Super Bowl winning coach, to me, like when you start looking up, Evan Neal versus the lineman from NC State, right? Like to me, like might sound like a cop out, but like I know Evan Neal every day in practice. He went 1v1 with Will Anderson, right? Like he went with players like that. That matters every single day. That competition matters. Playing in the SEC matters. And obviously, when you have a player like Trevor Lawrence, who didn't, he was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the NFL last year. You got to protect his blind side. Because they had a form. It could be their second time getting an Alabama left tackle. Moving on from Cam Robinson. But I think Evan Neal's a slam dunk, man. I look at all the measurables. I look at all the metrics. Like I think Evan Neal would be. I think the Jaguars would be dumb not to take him because the Lions. I mean, it's pretty much a given that they're going to take Aiden Hutchinson because that's a move that makes sense for them, right? Because he's a Michigan man. That's going to rile up the fan base. But man, Evan Neal to me would be an absolute slam dunk. Another player I forgot to mention, John Metchi. He's a guy he's kind of in the middle of the top tier of these wide receivers, right? He's not super, super elite, but he's obviously not awful. And he's not the worst of this class, but he's like, where does he fit? That's where I struggle to figure out where John Metchi goes because, he's not a Chris Olave. He's not a Drake London from USC. He's not a Garrett Wilson. He's not a Jameson Williams. What is he in this draft?
I think he's like that mid-tier. He's a second round pick. He's dependable. He's going to be a possession receiver. He's not a home run guy. I don't think I think he said something that he could run a low 4.4. I don't know. I'd like to see it. You know what I'm saying? But he'll be fast enough, but I don't think he's going to be that home run guy. He's going to be somebody that you want to pair up with a Jameson Williams. So if you have that speed guy, I think John Metchi is going to be a really good receiver and a good possession receiver that's going to put up numbers in the NFL. But like, I think people value that home run guy more. And he's not that. So I think that probably puts him into that second bracket. But I still think to me, he's definitely day two. And I think probably closer to the second round than the third.
Yeah, I think he's another guy like Robinson where he's like reliable and you know what you're getting. And so like he's a good compliment guy. Like I think about like the Chiefs, like a compliment to Tyreek Hill. Like you have Hill is the home run guy, and then Metchi's like an over the middle possession guy, like you said, or another team that just needs like a reliable complement to their one. Because I like Metchi, but I don't think he's going to be like necessarily a one in the NFL just with his skill set. Like I don't like he's not a super like he's not fast enough to really be that guy or necessarily has the size. And so like I just think he's going to be a reliable guy, probably like second, third round. He'll be picked day two at some point.
My biggest.
And there's nothing. I think sometimes you look at possession receiver and you're like, oh,
yeah, that's not a bad thing.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Trevon Diggs is a possession receiver. You know what I'm saying? And like one of the best receivers in the league. So I don't necessarily think that like that is a bad thing to be. There's a need for that. Yeah.
My biggest concern, and I might have said this on here when he announced that he had, intentions to enter the NFL draft, is could we see the opposite of this, right? Like Devontae Smith had a chance to leave after his junior year, guys. And what did he do? He said, I'm going to stay, get my degree. And he put up the greatest receiver history in college football, right? Is John Metchi going to sit there, on day two of the NFL draft and think, man, I wonder what it, you can see guys' names go above him. He's coming off an ACL tear again, like Jameson Williams. Like, is he going to sit there and be like, man, like, I wish I would have done what Devontae did and come back? That would be
that's a good concern. I mean, like, I don't know. And, I don't know his situation. Money's money too. And he's going to still get a lot of it. But yeah, I mean, you could argue that if he definitely would have been the number one receiver for Alabama. coming back. You still have a guy that can showcase your skills in Bryce Young coming back. So yeah, it kind of makes a little sense. I see what you're saying. You know, he'd be in an offense where I think he could showcase his skill. But like I said, I mean, you work your whole career to get to this point, and he has an opportunity to do something big. And also, I mean, as much as, you know, he could probably improve his stock, he's also put together basically back-to-back 1,000-yard, you know, 1,000-yard seasons through the air. So, I mean, like, he also has proven a lot already. So maybe he's thinking like, I don't know how much more I can prove. I've already shown what I can do. You know what I'm saying? Because I mean, how much more is he actually going to get? I mean, he had huge numbers this year. He had like almost 100 receptions, right? I think he had like 96 receptions. So it really doesn't get much better, you know?
Yeah, and he had the chance to be the guy in 2022, but we'll see, right? And you talk about money's money, right? You look at Alabama's team, and Tony, you'll probably know more about this than me or Blake, but like when it comes to NIL, like John Metchi was out in front of that. I mean, John Metchi had some NIL deals set up. And so you know, if he comes back, you know, it could be a bigger NIL deal. Who knows? But real brief, we'll go talk about defenders and then move on to Bama basketball real quick here. Other players invited: Chris Allen, Jalen Armour-Davis, Christian Harris, Fedarian Mathis, LeBrian Ray. Those are other players for Alabama on the defensive side of the ball who are expected to participate in the NFL Combine. Out of those guys, real brief, who does the most for themselves? Who shines brightest in this pre-draft process?
I'm going to go back to my conversation with Oliver Hutchinson, and he picked Jalen Armour-Davis. And, you know, he said he's a track star in high school and a guy that you saw that in his game. And I think when you look back at the season, he was Alabama's most reliable defensive back, and he can do a lot of things. I think he's going to run well. It depends on, you know, how his hip is, but if he's totally healthy, I think he's going to run well. I think he's going to look well in the, you know, the on-field drill. So I think him, maybe Fedarian Mathis, but I'll go with Jalen Armour-Davis.
Yeah, I like Armour-Davis a lot, and he was a guy like maybe coming into the season that not a lot of Alabama fans were super excited about. Like everyone knew Job was going to start at one corner, and everyone was kind of like anxious to see Kool-Aid at the other side. And Armour-Davis came in, and he was super reliable, and so definitely him. I like how you said Fedarian Mathis, and I could see him definitely carving out a role just the same way that like Christian Barmore just did, and how he was a big piece on that defensive line. And so interior defensive linemen, like there's definitely room for him to make a name for himself and be able to carve out a good role at that position.
Yeah, I like Christian Harris too. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to be like a kind of a steal, maybe go on in the second round. But yeah, Fedarian Mathis, such a fun guy, such a fun player to cover. His personality will definitely be one the NFL fans will love. Bama basketball, guys, coming off a tough loss to Texas A&M. I mean, I know Alabama didn't play them last year because A&M and they were dealing with COVID, but man, 4 straight losses to this Aggie program, 87-61 on Wednesday night. It was rough. The effort was not there. The second half, 50 points to A&M. I mean, that's not a team you expect to go in there and score 50 points in 20 minutes of basketball. But, you know, on the bright side, and I tell people this all the time, like, just calm down. This is basketball, right? I mean, things like this happen. There's up and downs. There's ebbs and flows in a season. But Alabama's not on the bubble. It's March. They're not on the bubble. They're still projected to be. They're a 5 seed or 6 seed. All is well. There's just seems some intangibles that are just missing with this team, and fans probably need to come to grips with that and just say, hey, you know what? Let's just have fun on this journey. Let's have fun. It's March. You know, let's have a good time at Tampa. But yeah, what are y'all thoughts coming out of the A&M game and coming into LSU this weekend? We'll start with you, Blake.
Well, I think this team, like the talent's there, and you've seen the talent. They beat Gonzaga, they beat Houston, they beat Baylor, they're good at basketball. They just don't have a leader. And so like even in like his press conference last night, like Oates was like, last year you had Herb who would get in people's faces. You had John Petty, you had Jordan Bruner, like all veteran guys who would get in people's faces when things aren't going right. Be like, keep your head up, keep playing, stay locked in. This year they don't have that. And they have like the closest thing they have to a leader really is James Rojas. There were early reports that Namari Burnett was going to be some sort of vocal leader on this team, but there's only so much that you can lead from the bench without actually being able to play. Like Javon Quinterly, Jaden Shackelford, they're really good basketball players, but like Shaq's a quiet kind of guy. Quinterly's only really super vocal when he's playing well. And so when you have and Keon Ellis is also only really vocal when he's playing well. And so when you have the guys that need to be your leaders who are only vocal when they're playing well and they're only speaking up, then that's going to be an issue. And that's some of the reason that you've seen all of these inconsistencies is that they don't stay locked in when things aren't going well. And whenever they start playing bad, it just the wheels fall off because you don't really have a leader in that locker room.
Yeah, Tyler, I think you kind of put it the best way is just kind of have fun on the journey. I don't see this Alabama team ever establishing the consistency. Like if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. It's kind of like, you know, they're kind of like the lover that always does you wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like they do enough to you know, to make you think like, oh, it's finally going to get good now, you know, that they've turned it around and then they'll go and do something else. So I think that is going to haunt them. That's the reason why they're not going to be able to make a deep tournament run or a super deep tournament run. They might win 2 games, but I don't really see them stringing the amount of wins they're going to have to together just because it doesn't matter who they play. Even if things break well for them, I don't think it will matter because I think they'll get upset just because they can't sustain this consistency. It has everything to do with the way Alabama plays and less to do with the way their competition plays or who they're playing. And that's what I've been saying. It's like, you know, does it matter if they're the 5 or the 7 seed? You know, maybe not, probably not. The bad thing is I think we're realizing it's not going to matter because I don't think Alabama's going to figure it out either way. And I know that sounds super negative, but that's kind of what I think. They have the ability to beat everyone. I wouldn't want to play Alabama in the tournament, but I also wouldn't want to beat Alabama in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And like going into like in Tampa next week, Alabama, depending on the game against LSU on Saturday, they're either going to be a 5 or like a 6 or a 7. Let's say they're a 5. Like they could lose that first round game to Missouri or to Ole Miss, or you could see them beat them. You could see them knock off the 4, whether that be Arkansas or Tennessee or whoever. Like you could see them compete with Auburn. Like we've seen all of these things. It's just one of those things where like don't bet on them to do anything because you don't know what's going to happen. Like they could do it. Obviously, they have the talent to, but you just don't know.
I see them winning 1 game and losing another. Like that's like, I'm almost like, if I was going to bet on anything, I see them winning the first one, losing the second one. That's like so on par for this team.
Yeah, I agree with that, guys. And, you know, just by a lot of the reaction, right, I saw, you know, in Coleman with some of the fans and on Twitter, it's like people think this team is going to be playing in the CBI. I mean, this team is on the brink still of 20 wins. Yeah, 20 plus wins for a second straight season. And, you know, everyone acts like the sky's falling. Guys, you know,
they haven't gotten there yet, Tyler.
Hey, I said they're on the brink. They're on the brink of 20 plus wins for a second straight season. And that's got to mean something, man. Like that, you got to take pride in that. You got to get to that point. And we'll see, man. Alabama's had LSU's number, right? They've won 6 in a row against them. This is the exact game, 11 o'clock CBS on Saturday morning, where I think Alabama could come out and we'd be like, that's the Alabama that, you know, the Jekyll to the Hyde Alabama that this is the Alabama we expected, and that's the Alabama we get on Saturday.
So 100%, like I think they go to Baton Rouge, LSU, win the first game of the tournament, and then everyone's like, oh man, okay, deep run, they're on a roll now, and then they'll lose. It doesn't matter who they play. It could be like an upset. They could, and I don't know how the bracket turns out, but they could play like one of the, you know, lower seeds somehow on like what I guess would it be like Saturday or whatever, and they're still gonna lose. Like,
you just never know.
Expectations have been raised for this program, which is great. But people need to stop acting like it's the end of the freaking world.
No, it's been a good season regardless. There's a lot of teams that would, you know, love to trade positions with Alabama. I mean, like, no, regardless of what they do in the tournament, right? You can go back at this season and say you beat 3 of last season's top, Final 4 teams. Like that's something that like this team will be remembered for. And you know, I think in college basketball, you look for things like what is this team going to be remembered for? And yes, it'll be remembered for its inconsistencies and probably underperforming, but like also it's going to be remembered for that. So it's definitely not a bad season. It is a below, they performed below expectations, but those expectations were so high that like, you know, if Alabama has this season every single year, Nate Oates is going to be fine. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of coaches that would love to have this as a bad season.
Well, Tony, you make some awesome points. Blake, thanks for coming on here, guys. Look forward to doing this again real soon. You can find those guys on Twitter, obviously on BamaCentral.com. For Tony Tsoukalas, Blake Byler, I am Todd Martin. This has been the All Things Bama podcast. Thank you for listening.